Thank you very much, Munir, and good morning, everyone. And I want to start by really thanking Munir also for the tremendous input he's had to the Northwest Coast Genomic Medicine Centre. I don't get often an opportunity to say that, but he's been a real driving force, so thank you very much. I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time on the NHS response to the 100,000 Genomes project, but more to set that into the context of the future and the future arrangements that we're going to put in place, because critical to thinking about a personalised medicine approach in the NHS is how we build upon the legacy of the 100,000 Genomes project. Otherwise, it's not possible. The reason why there's an interest in NHS England, particularly at the very top of the organisation, in genomics and combining genomic information with other clinical phenotypic data through the power of computing and the ability to apply data analytics, is because the NHS is facing a series of challenges as we look towards the future. This was outlined in the 5-year forward view that sets really the direction for the NHS in terms of making it sustainable for the future. And that 5-year forward view recognised that we had 3 main gaps: a care and quality gap, a health and well-being gap, and a finance and efficiency gap. But what it also, against those 3 gaps, there are 5 paradoxes. So, for example, in some areas we have improvements in quality of care, but on the other hand, we also have a widening gap in terms of the variability of care. And never is that more true than in access to molecular investigations within the NHS. But what the 5-year forward view helpfully said is part of the solution is embracing science and innovation and this information technology. So we've got the will of the top of the organisations to take this forward and to use this to really affect change for the future and create a sustainable NHS. We've already heard from Tim very eloquently about the power of whole genome sequencing and what it's leading to in terms of increased diagnostic yield. But if we look at this slide, what is it that we're building upon? We're building upon a long history of genetic laboratories within our NHS. We've had laboratories since the 1960s, and by and large, they've been one of the services in the NHS that have been ahead of the adoption curve. The second is this real ability now to take and to capitalise on both the exponential growth in information, but recognise as part of a mindset change that the information that we're going to generate in this whole genomic space may be greater than what's actionable today for an individual patient. And that is a mindset change in terms of the clinical community. But I often liken this to changes in imaging, that we generate a lot more data that isn't actually used for clinical care at that particular moment in time. You've heard really powerfully from Tim that what the creation of the informatics platforms is allowing us to do is to collect large clinical phenotypic data sets and combine that with genomic information and to apply a set of analytical and in the future artificial intelligence applications to this that helps us better define clinical types and clinical subtypes in the future. But our real opportunity in the pharmacogenomics and stratified medicine space is our opportunity to look across the whole of the functional genomics pathway, from DNA right through to metabolomics. And we are really not going to be able to introduce personalised medicine into the NHS unless we adopt this whole functional genomics pathway and use that to create individualised pharmacogenomic profiles. But what we know is that technology is moving at pace such that point-of-care molecular devices are really on the cusp of being utilised. They're already being utilised in infectious disease. But think about what this might mean in terms of what could be delivered at a primary care level to provide real-time opportunity. So genomics is giving us both the patient push in terms of better outcomes, better access, reducing variability, but also this big science pull. Now, the 100,000 Genomes project is the cornerstone of our future science within the NHS and the model for transformation. You've heard already from Tim that it's taking patients from routine care, treated through routine channels, but against a backdrop of a research mentality in terms of the standards that need to have to be achieved, the data sets that need to be populated. And importantly over here is one of the main aims of this project is how we integrate advanced genomics into mainstream practice from the very beginning of the NHS's participation in this study. There's nothing else that parallels this approach anywhere else in the world. But what it's also done is focus the NHS on this research aim here, but also how the NHS can work differently with life sciences industries for the future. And so, for example, as a result of the NHS participating in the 100,000 Genomes project, we're seeing enhanced recruitment to NIHR portfolio studies, but also patients entering into other clinical trials. This has been amazing in terms of the pace of change and the transformation. We've moved from a proof of concept project into implementation into the NHS in less than 3 years, and I'm going to tell you why that's the case. But it's been aligned helpfully to two of our main system priorities. One is the UK Rare Disease Strategy, and the second is the National Cancer Task Force recommendations. Because despite lots of efforts in cancer, where we are now in some cancer types is no improvements in survival for over a decade. So this is a model for transformational change in the NHS in general, and this is the real opportunity to link personalised and stratified medicine with this, like never before. What we know is the industry strategy, the life sciences industry strategy is being finalised by Sir John Bell, and we know that genomics will figure as one of the grand challenges within that life sciences strategy for the next 3 years to 2021. And that's the planning landscape that we're working on in NHS England to plan the legacy infrastructure in the NHS to take this forward. You've already heard from Tim that we have 13 genomic medicine centres covering the NHS in England, with the South London Genomic Medicine Centre also covering Kent, Surrey and Sussex. You've already seen from Tim what the NHS is delivering on this right-hand side, but these are the type of things that the NHS have had to do. Not only new models for consent, but they've had to standardise and transform models of care across geographies that can range, on average, between 3 and 5 million of the population, multiple hospital organisations. There will be 85 NHS trusts involved at the end of the project, but our challenge is how do we take it out to all NHS trusts and include primary care. There's been involvement of multiple clinical specialties, not just clinical genetics. You've heard because of the challenges in cancer of getting optimal whole genome sequences from cancer tissue that we've had to introduce new fresh frozen processing pathways that have fundamentally meant a re-engineering of the cancer pathway from identification in MDTs through to new theatre handling arrangements in terms of not intuitively dropping everything into formalin through to new ways of processing tissue in pathology. We've created 13 data collation and handling hubs in those 13 genomic medicine centres because in individual institutions sometimes data is needed to be pulled from 600 standalone systems to populate one data set for one individual patient. But think about what that means in terms of the interoperability that we've created, but also the data standards that the NHS are working towards. There have been new validation and feedback arrangements such that for the very first time, genomic MDTs have been created for rare disease and cancer. They are talking about medicines and other interventions, not just about the genomic information. They're also using these MDTs to talk about the use of existing molecular data in the NHS and not just whole genome sequence data that's only just starting to emerge. But what's been critical to this is partnership and network working like we've never seen before, but also clinical leadership and that critical patient and public involvement from the very beginning. You've already heard from Tim about the infrastructure that's been created, and he's done that much better than I could actually ever do. But what's really been important about the infrastructure is how this works at the bottom here. And this is part of what we've got to create for the future in terms of how do we ensure that this systematically covers the whole of the NHS. But what we have created through this project is a UK national knowledge base of de-identified data so that industry and also researchers can access that data. But it's a new way of thinking, as Tim has already said, about data collection as well as data sharing and utilisation for multiple purposes, as you're going to hear about from Andrew next. So that is what we're trying to create in terms of planning for the future and the infrastructure we're looking to evolve. So that will include new, for example, new network of NHS genomic laboratories that we're in the middle of reprocuring, an evolved role for our genomic medicine centres, and new ways of working with Genomics England as we go into 2018-19 through to 2021. But also, what it will mean from 2018-19 is that NHS England will be commissioning a whole genome sequencing provider for the NHS, but for use in routine care. But I'm very clear that this doesn't just include whole genome sequencing, that this is underpinned by a whole new genomic testing strategy for the NHS in cancer and rare disease, rare and inherited disease. But it also includes those other components of the functional genomics pathway. So that's the planning work we're doing at the moment. So this project and how the NHS has responded to has really laid the foundations for future care. We're seeing there will be an increased diagnostic repertoire in the NHS up to the level of whole genome sequencing, but other functional genomics. We're already seeing better characterization of disease through new data sets. We're seeing an increased diagnostic yield, as Tim has said, in the region of 25%, but that could be greater. A critical part of getting that diagnostic yield is, for example, in rare disease, using HPO terms to better characterize disease. But we're already driving the personalisation of treatment options, thinking about primary and secondary data, how we link and use big data, what the role then is of multi-omics, how we can deliver new models of care at the disease boundaries, and how we can work for the future for patient benefit and for NHS benefit. Think about what this might mean in terms of drug pricing for the future, in terms of new partnerships with patients, industry and academia. Our challenge now is, can we align it with all these NHS clinical priorities here on the left-hand side? So where is it taking healthcare? It's really enabling us to go back to that 5-year forward view and say, we do have a way of taking forward a more population-based health approach, with a step change in prevention and prediction of disease, in influencing the type of lifestyle choices, but on the right-hand side, really tackling the limits of one-size-fits-all medicines and a new way of working with industry in terms of the costs it takes to develop their blockbuster drugs. It will align with medicine's optimisation and managing adverse drug reactions, and I'll come back to that in a minute, as well as enabling new treatment targets to be identified and new treatments. This isn't all about new treatments, though. It's about repurposing existing treatments. Our challenge is how we personalise medicine across this care continuum, and we don't focus just at the right-hand side of this. We don't focus on late-stage disease, where it's very difficult to influence outcomes for the patients. And this is really the holy grail for all healthcare systems. And I took this slide from a presentation that Phil Beals gave recently, because I think it's a great slide to really summarise where we need to be, and I know Phil got it from this source here. But it really outlines the fact that where we've been in healthcare and where genomics and the ability to couple it with big data is taking us. It's taking us from volume-driven healthcare, where the demand in the NHS rises by 4% each year, to something that's much more value-driven, and a value-driven approach to population healthcare. We know that sequencing is cheap now and will come down even lower during 1819 and beyond. We now know we can couple that with data. We've taken the patients and the public on a journey through the 100,000 Genomes project and through many other initiatives. So the patient is ready and aware of wanting to maintain the institution that is the NHS for the future, without having to pay a lot more taxes or take it from other vital services. So precision and personalised medicine is really becoming a reality if we want to not only get better responses and minimise effects, but use the money in the system better, but also to drive the variances in response and how we manage that, how we have new conversations with patients, and how we better understand the underlying disease. But if we get this right, this will lead to some cost reductions. So, part of the challenge, though, as we think about a personalised medicine approach, is how do we, in each of the different disease entities or groups of clinical decisions, decide what is our tipping point for introducing a precision or personalised medicine approach? And what other information do we need to bring together, apart from the type of data sets we're using in this in the 100,000 genomes population, to identify the patient that will respond. Now, I hope through this network, through our partnership with other academic centres, that you will help us identify those potential targets. But as we move forward, part of what we have to do is also integrate and in some way transform all of our diagnostic services and make sure that we do collect all of the data that is in the system. So this will be about next generation diagnostic tests across all of our diagnostic testing modalities, and not just in genomics, to help us go from this one-size-fits-all to a much more individually tailored approach around drugs, the use of devices, and a range of different interventions. But what will be critical is we all subscribe to this concept of a national genomic knowledge base, or the type of health research data centre that Andrew's going to be leading for the future. We outlined this last year from NHS England in our 2015 document on improving outcomes through personalised medicine. The next step is how we put this into place. And I just want to come back to revisit why it is we need to do this. We spend over £15 billion each year in the NHS on drugs. That is set to rise to £21 billion over the next few years. We spend £10 billion on diagnostics. In general, we don't bring the two together. This is our opportunity to bring that together. This is the type of drug efficacy. It varies depending on the disease entity, but a lot of drugs we give aren't efficacious. We've got 1 in 15 hospital episodes for adverse drug reactions, £88 million in costs, 4% of bed capacity. We can do better than that. And this is our opportunity to do better than that and to properly characterise what we all know is heterogeneity in non-communicable diseases. So, a big part of the focus in NHS England is on medicines optimisation, and a key part of that is adherence. And I think we'll have to get into a new mindset about the use of biomarkers to start to understand which patients may not be adherent to their medicines, but also which, through that mechanism, how, if they're going to be non-adherent for the future, for example, how that might drive us into a different type of treatment for that patient. If, for example, that may be inhaled medications that are where patients and a certain subset of the patients are particularly bad at taking that. But in terms of the 4 fundamentals for medicines, optimisation, which is here, we've got a real opportunity to use genomics to drive more precise diagnosis, to deliver more precise treatment selection and fewer non-responders. On principle 2 around evidence-based choice of medicines, so that we can really generate pharmacogenomic profiles so that we can predict the response on the basis of evidence. On principle 3 about ensuring medicines are used as safe as possible, to really use this to prevent the number of adverse drug reactions. And on principle 4, which is making medicines optimisation part of routine practice, we're already working on plans to mainstream genomic testing to get rid of the variability and to pharmacogenomic profile individual patients linked to the sharing of patient data records. So this can align with the big programme of work on medicines optimisation that will be happening across the whole of the NHS in England. Now, this forms the centre point of our personalised medicine approach in NHS England. It recognises we're starting down here, but that we can only really take this approach forward if we combine it across that multi-omic pathway, but also bring it together with other diagnostics with deep phenotypic characterisation and eventually with patient-generated and wearable type data. But this is where we're heading over the next few years, that we'll use, we're in here at the moment where we're applying whole genome sequencing and big data in rare disease and cancer to effect a change. But over 1819 to 2021, we want to roll out genomic medicine to underpin personalised treatments more broadly. So not necessarily including only whole genome sequencing, but using, for example, more simple molecular markers to drive a personalised approach until we get to 2020 and beyond, and we've got it embedded into routine care. And this will drive the 4 Ps of personalised medicine. But the work we're embarking on is one, really understanding the clinical change that needs to happen, driven by exemplar pathways that we're working on with the Academy of Medical Sciences, but also what is the operating model in terms of clinical care. And that's why we need help from organisations like this and many others. At the bottom here, we're starting on the informatics developments with NHS Digital, continuing with Genomics England, but also in the NHS to ensure we get that interoperability and the ability to extract data. But importantly, we have to align the commissioning system to this. And that includes a better way of utilising and directing CCG money in the NHS in England and bringing that together with the pot of money that we have in NHS England for specialised commissioning and for primary care. So over the next year, we'll be working very hard on ensuring we have an underpinning commissioning framework to introduce personalised medicine. We've already heard this morning about the importance of bringing the regulators on this journey with us, because this will involve using off-licensed drugs, perhaps. And so that's part of the policy and system alignment. But at the very top there, We're only going to be as good in this space if we're able to adopt new technology and all the advances in this space rapidly. Sometimes we won't have time to wait for randomized controlled trials for there to be introduction into the NHS. So we have to, as well in this, understanding the change in technology, how this will drive that disruptive innovation and how we create a knowledge base for the future. That means the commissioning and provider system in the NHS is aligned with this, and we're building this into our plans now. These are the early opportunities for personalised care. If we look across that care continuum from tertiary and specialist care through to primary care and at home. And at the top, we know that there's significant variation in treatment, for example, in diabetes. So we need to do more. That's not all going to be about doing whole genome sequencing, but it will be doing more systematically some of the genomic tests and other tests in that area. Where, for example, we know new diagnostics can be applied. So in cancer, we have a whole host of things that happen in the NHS. Some patients hardly get any molecular markers. Others are getting huge gene panels performed on their tumour tissues. And that influences outcomes if you plot the outcome data on the top of that. So part of this will drive us into doing more molecular tests on cancer at the point of diagnosis. We're starting a piece of work in warfarin to better align genotyping with actually other components of understanding the type of warfarin dosing that people should be utilised, and that includes with Munir and with Sir John Byrne. And then also, we are taking a systematic approach to familial hypercholesterolemia, where we do little genetic testing, but where we know we can fundamentally influence outcomes in childhood for individuals and reduce the number of deaths in people from under the age of 50. So there's something we can do that doesn't involve whole genome sequencing that we're doing in a systematic way as we go forward. I just wanted to say a word, though, as I come towards the end, about technology. And part of the future will be about how we use technology to better effect. And this is one of the centres in the States that's working as part of the Precision Medicine Initiative out on the West Coast. But it's really using technology at every part of this pathway, but including for medicines adherence and for optimisation. And so part of the future in pharmacogenomics and stratified medicine is embracing all of this technology to improve our outcome. We will need to have a mechanism for rapidly generating evidence for adoption across the innovation pathway. For patient benefit, but also for research purposes, and to really carefully align this with research to support future care and innovation, whether that's characterization and segmentation of disease to target delivery, or whether it's a more translational research and more candidate products, better selection of clinical trial subjects that make clinical trials more affordable, or better tests for patients. But what's at the centre of this is making better use of real-world data to make sure that our drug trials are conducted in that environment and then we get the best outcomes for patients. We've got to transform this patient pathway here. We've got to bring together at the top here the patient integrated record. We've got to use next generation diagnostics to determine our prescribing decisions and how we go back into this loop to really affect change, but also think about the decision support that's required to bring patients together. What this will mean, though, is multidisciplinary teams working together in clinical care, in academia, and that includes new expertise in the NHS in bioinformatics. And finally, what we shouldn't forget is to implement this future, we have to take our patients and our public along with us. There's lots more we need to do in terms of the conversations with our patients. The 100,000 Genomes Project has been a really big catalyst for having those discussions, but there's more that we need to do, and especially in the space of medicines, and when medicines may be withheld for very good objective reasons. But think about this situation, and that's perhaps where we need to be in terms of where we might create our very first pharmacogenomic profile. If we do this, we'll deliver improvements for our patients, for our population, and the system. We'll deliver the 3 gaps that were identified in making the NHS sustainable for the future. And what we're trying to create in NHS England is to underpin this by an infrastructure that evolves and recognises the pace of change for the future. Integration and collaboration will be everything between all of these different players, and that's only how we're going to get maximum advance. And we've got a good model in Genomics England and the Clinical Interpretation Partnership for how this might happen. And then finally, we're on a journey. We're on a journey to a new taxonomy of medicine by 2025, underpinned by the underlying cause and the personal response of individuals. And this is the journey that we're planning in NHS England to align with this overall approach. And by 2020, we will be in a very different place, in a place that embraces personalised medicine than we will be today. And just to finish then, I love this quote from John F. Kennedy, which is about when the US sent the rocket to the moon. The bottom line is this is the moonshot moment in the UK. It's the moonshot moment for the NHS. And what I often say in front of audiences like you, there's no plan B. This is it. We're in it together, and now we have to create this future and make sure that we deliver it. So thank you very much.